Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's scene recording. I am Jess Painter. I'm one of the BFI Film Academy Young Programmers. So basically, these interviews are us talking to emerging filmmakers about their work, their influences, their experiences filmmaking, a little bit about their roots into the screen industries, and hopefully getting some advice for young filmmakers who hopefully might be watching this today. So this is the last of our scene events in the Beyond Human series, where we've been focusing on films which kind of deal with non-human subjects, looking at other worlds and things like that. So today I'm going to be talking to Dan Short about his film Intercellular. It's a brilliant microbiology documentary, which definitely deals with some things really far away from the human experience. So Dan is a shooting researcher. He's a wildlife filmmaker, and his film Intercellular has recently been nominated for a Emerging Talent Panda Award at Wild Screen Festival, which is amazing. So I'm so excited to introduce Dan today.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Jess.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. I know you've had a really long drive today, so it's very much appreciated. Just to get started, I'd love to just hear a brief introduction of Intercellular. What is the film about? Who does it focus on, or what maybe does it focus on what are they getting up to in this film?
Yeah, so Interstellar is a sort of behavioural wildlife film. So the main characters are Paramecium, which are free-living, single-celled organisms. So it basically means that they can live on their own. They don't depend on other cells, basically. So in a way, they're almost like animals in themselves. They function the same way, and they hunt for food and they escape prey and things like that. So intercellular is essentially the life cycle of a single-celled paramecium, basically. So you see the paramecium being born through sort of cell division, and it sort of journeys through life into for the first time, and sort of encounters certain sort of dangers along the way, sort of explores its world or its universe, and then because when cells divide, they actually sort of break down their DNA. So it sort of tells that story of death in paramecium as well, and ultimately how they sort of get around that by meeting another paramecium essentially at the end.
The whole life cycle is included. I mean, it's an amazing film, and it's so engaging. And I suppose it is wildlife filmmaking. It's looking at like a, as you said, almost an animal. I'm probably referring it to the wrong way, so please jump in and say that's wrong. But I wanted to ask a bit about, I mean, when I think about wildlife filmmaking and when people watching this might think about it, a lot of the first things that come to mind are kind of like big blue chip productions. Maybe David Attenborough's involved. There's normally quite large, charismatic animals people might be familiar with. Whereas the paramecium, maybe it would be fair to say, is less outwardly lovable than some of these animals. So
I
why
think
did you
that's
choose?
fair to
Yeah,
say.
like a
Sort
bit
of
of an unlikely
a
subject.
small blob, basically, aren't they?
Yeah.
Really. I mean, yeah, I think that's kind of why I wanted to do it in the first place, really. I mean, so in terms of like the origin sort of story, I basically just watched a YouTube video. It's called the channel's called Journey to the Microcosmos,
Wow.
and I just saw a video of single cells hunting other single cells, and I've never seen it before. I was just thought this is literally as dramatic as anything you ever see on sort of the planet Earth and all of those big blue chip series. Uh, and then I kind of did like a bit of digging, and I couldn't find anything that was sort of focusing purely on microbes as the sole character. There's
Mm.
sort of references and sort of shots and some really beautiful stuff, but they're never sort of the main focus. And yeah, so it was just that sort of spawned the idea is like, how do I do this? And I thought of telling the sort of life cycle of a cell. But yeah, you're right. It's they basically never are the
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 main character.
main characters. Yeah, and they are sort of in a way quite hard to relate to. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean they're single cells, so I mean I think most people don't even really think about cells as anything other than sort of in a scientific
Mm.
perspective, and all sort of the sort of base level of sort of our ecosystem serving sort of purpose. But they sort of they work within niches of sort of environmental and biological technological niches of their own.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Like what you said about it being kind of just as dramatic as those kind of scenes we're more familiar with. It's so
Mm.
true. And actually, because it's so unfamiliar, it almost feels more so. Whereas I feel sometimes you have an expectation when you're watching wildlife films like that of the dynamics that are playing out and the way that your film kind of presents those as something completely new. It's really
Yeah,
exciting. Can't believe
I
it's
think
never been
that's the
done
thing as
before.
well. Like, I think series like that are always trying to find new things to film as well.
Definitely, yeah.
Uh,
But they've
and
got to call you up, Dan.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's what I think. It's like sort of it is literally an entire sort of, like, I keep using this sort of terms, like it is sort of basically a universe
Yeah.
that is sort of untapped, and there's so much diversity, so many different weird and sort of, I don't know if there's the shot of the amoeba. It's like a time lapse in the sort of first sort of quarter.
Yeah.
It's just mind blowing to sort of
It's
see how they
beautiful. It's amazing.
sort of free form and yeah, yeah,
You
incredible.
mentioned like a time lapse then. How did you actually go about filming? Because it's obviously you're right on a tiny scale, on a macro scale. I
Yeah.
understand you kind of had your own setup. Could you talk a bit about how you put that together and how that all worked?
So in terms of the setup, it was just a microscope.
Mhm.
It's actually it was a microscope I got given. It was reclaimed out of a skip. So there's an amazing guy called Mike Crutchley, who's a brilliant sort of micro photographer,
Yeah.
and he really generously gave me the microscope to film with. But then functionally, how it works is you have a sort of a trinocular head. Basically, means you can attach a camera on top whilst also still looking
Mhm.
through. So that's basically the actual camera setup, and it's also, I think for me it was really important to use, it's a sort of lighting technique
Mhm.
called dark field, which is basically where you block out the light from behind, and the light comes through the sides and just illuminates the specimens basically.
Is that kind of how you got it's so vivid, the colors? I mean, some of them look
Yeah, yeah,
completely.
I think so. I think because I think when you, I don't know if you've used microscopes at school or something or anything like
I
that,
have, yeah.
you sort yeah, that it's usually bright field,
Yeah.
so it's almost like a white background, and it feels very well. I can't think of the right word, but
It's like sterile, isn't
feels,
it?
yeah, it feels quite sterile. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think as soon as you use dark field, it can't you sort of trick people into thinking that it's in a natural environment
Yeah.
potentially.
It
So
certainly tricked me. Well,
yeah,
you have that kind of opening shot, like we're traveling down into this pond
yeah.
environment now, which is, you feel like you're really being transported.
Mhm.
You talk about the microscope and kind of having, you're looking down into it. It's a way more controlled environment, I suppose. I mean, I'd
Yeah.
like to know a bit about how that compares to your other experiences, maybe filming larger animals, you're out in
Mm.
the field. Are the challenges the same, or is it just a completely different experience?
I think it is quite different. Uh, in terms of other stuff that I've done, I mean, sort of filmed albatrosses before,
Mhm.
and sort of various different animals. But I think with microscopy, you have almost total control in terms of you can. So I can basically go and collect a sample, which I'm pretty confident would have something in. You basically
Mhm.
always find something. They're literally everywhere.
So
You literally,
exciting
yeah,
to see,
yeah.
wait and see what's in it.
Um, and then you can literally sort of build a scene on the slide as well. So
Mm.
you sort of pipette your sample over, and you can actually use sort of like dentistry tools,
Oh,
which are
wow.
actually really like really useful. But and then you can sort of build a scene from there. So you can
Yeah.
literally play. It's like a really tiny studio macro setup basically.
That's so
Um,
cool. You've
but
got
then
a lot of control then.
yeah, but I think in the same way as like um, any sort of animal, they never really do what you hoped or want them to
Yeah.
do. So there's always that issue of you sort of think that they're about to do something,
Mm.
and they obviously don't. I think I so one of the crucial bits that was, I mean, it's literally kicks off the life cycle of the
Yeah.
Paramecium dividing. I can't tell you how long I spent sat just watching
Yeah.
Paramecium floating around, thinking that they were going to divide, uh, and they never would. And then finally, I think it was sort of 10 days in of just purely, I'd have to
Oh my
sort of go
gosh,
away and
10
do
days.
something else. But it is quite useful that you can literally just you're just sat there and
Come
you've
and go, yeah.
yeah,
You're not in a field sort
try
of
again.
freezing cold.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you prefer, I mean, is there something that you miss from that, I guess, experience of being outside and being kind of within the elements more so and being like
a little
inhabiting the same world a bit more as
A
the
little
actors
bit, I
are.
think, yeah. I think because I basically made the film on the wildlife filmmaking masters at uni,
Yeah.
and I sort of became a little bit of a joke on the course where everyone was going to these far flung corners of
Who's
of
laughing
the
now?
world, and I sort of sat in my mum's shed
Yeah.
filming microbes for 6 weeks. Yeah, you do a little bit, but at the same time, you're so immersed in a completely different world
Mm.
that and to be honest, that I actually hadn't really even used a microscope before I made the film.
Yeah.
So for me, it was just a mind blowing experience in the first place,
Well,
just
it's what,
seeing all
yeah.
of this amazing stuff for the first time. Sort of having read about it and done all the research to sort of see it, if it was possible.
So
But yeah,
satisfying, the thought of reading about it and actually that thing you were saying about taking a pipette and not knowing quite what you were going to see, but knowing there was going to be something in there. I mean, it sounds really exciting.
yeah,
I'd love to talk a bit more about, you were sort of talking about how you were arranging a scene, as it were, which sounds
mhm,
very like a director working with actors. I mean,
yeah.
which is so far off, obviously, like a documentary format. So I'd love to hear a bit more about how you kind of created a sense of character and narrative, because it does feel, when I was watching it, it's a very kind of human story of survival. There's really joyous moments. There's quite
Mhm.
terrifying moments. I mean, there's even like a bit that feels quite romantic. Like you managed to get all these very human qualities. How did you kind of go about doing that? Or was it already apparent when watching the
I
organisms?
think it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I
Mm,
think we naturally sort of anthropomorphize everything. I
definitely.
think trying to separate my own sort of anthropomorphizing of stuff is quite difficult. But I think you, I mean, in some ways they have similarities in quite basic ways, in the sense that
Hmm.
they react to stimuli and things like that, and they do sort of make decisions in a way. So they will respond to threats, and they sort of find their way through they make decisions on where they're going and things like that. But ultimately, you do have to, it is a sort of creative process and creative
Yeah.
control of, and in the same way as many sort of blue chips documentaries do, you sort of lean into what you're trying to tell in that scene, and
Hmm.
what sort of looks like it could be that. So there is like small amounts of trickery,
Mm.
um, but I think in terms of character though, uh, I think especially not having any narration and not really telling much with text. Only really there's a few bits of text at the beginning and the end, and
Hmm.
also sort of the titles, the and also with the chapters. Sorry, um, but I think without all that, I think the music was just the most crucial part of the entire thing. I think without that, you don't get a sense of character, because like I think as well basically because uh, we use sound effect in the music as well,
Hmm.
so you really add character to the little organisms basically as they sort of bump around and move around. You also hear a note in the music. It was
Definitely.
quite playful, especially when he's exploring at the beginning.
The
I
way
think,
that it's kind of aligned with exactly the first kind of bit when that synth comes in and it's aligned perfectly to the organism's movements. It's so satisfying. And as you say, it gives so much character. I'd love for
yeah,
you to talk a bit more about like how that soundtrack came to life. And, you talked about how you collaborated on that. So kind of
yeah.
how did that come about?
So I think it first of all it came down to the fact that I was thinking originally of doing Foley, and I thought,
Mhm.
what noise do microbes even make? Like you don't hear it. There's no sort of reference point. And I just couldn't imagine how I was even going to be able to do it. And I thought, what if you could sort of incorporate it into the music somehow? Because they're quite sci-fi-esque already.
Mm.
You could sort of, I was imagining a sort of synthesized sort of composition with some sort of synthy noises as they zoom around. And it was actually a friend of mine called Jeff, who had spotted a guy called Thomas Barrack,
Mhm.
who has an Instagram and YouTube channel called Animals and Synthesizers.
Great
And
title.
it's brilliant, yeah. And he did most of them. He does sort of albums and things like that, but a lot of it is sort of short clips of animals, and he sees the image and the movement, and he just imagines the sound, and he
Mhm.
makes them sort of so beautifully musical, and really sort of it makes you tune into the movements of things so much more, rather than just sort of generic sort of classical music over the background.
Yeah.
it's yeah, it really draws you into the movement. And I think there's like a few times where there's one scene where the Paramecium encounters like a Volvox, and
Mhm.
it is a sort of green, sort of spherical colony of algae, basically.
Yeah.
Uh, and it sort of just bumps into it, and it sort of, you never would have thought it was sort of rhythmic until he sort of turned that into the melody, basically.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that was, yeah, probably the
It's,
best
yeah.
decision I made for the film, actually.
It's so effective. And as you say, I never really thought about it like that, but it really makes you watch. Whereas that, as you say, that classical music, I feel like otherwise things kind of wash over you. And it's,
Mm,
I guess, especially important when you're working with subjects which, they don't have a face. They're not expressing themselves in a way that we can kind of layer our emotions and, that
mhm.
human-centric perspective onto. So, and it's just, yeah, it's so much fun to watch. I mean, it really reminded me of like a load of things, like as you said, sci-fi, sometimes like a monster movie, like a dance film at times. Even it reminded me of like video games like Pac-Man, the way that those things kind of were so tactile and how they interacted with each other. Did you kind of, you mentioned the sci-fi thing, but did you take a lot of references away from the natural world? Was that something that you wanted to include, or was it kind of a product of the music and yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think that it's sort of natural when you use dark field, it naturally looks like
Mm,
a sort of space scene. I think especially when there's just tiny little particles in there, they look like stars, basically.
mm,
So I think it was sort of the natural sort of aligning with sci-fi, but actually I didn't really want to lean into it too much. I wasn't
yeah.
trying. I didn't want to sort of spoof sort of sci-fi films with it. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. It is, yeah, I think it just sort of
Mm.
aligned quite nicely with a sort of synth music composition. But
Definitely did. I mean, but also that thing you're saying, you're not wanting to spoof sci-fi. I mean, it feels so unusual and extraordinary, and the kind of the monsters, as it were. Obviously, that's not what they are, but it's some of those organisms and creatures which come into display. They look like they could be something out of Alien, and they have that.
yeah,
It's so amazing. You wouldn't need to do that because that's already all there.
yeah,
So yeah, I loved it. I mean, kind of returning to that thing about documenting the non-human and what we've been talking about, like looking at non-human centric perspectives. I mean, why do you think it's important to document things which do feel really distant from human experiences? And even though these things are probably quite in close proximity to us, as you were saying earlier, we don't think about them in our day to day. They're kind of irrelevant for most people's lives. Why is it important to capture them on film?
I mean, I think it's just sort of finding a new perspective on things, isn't it? I
Mm,
think is always a sort of good thing to do. I mean, for me, and not to go back to the universe sort of thing again, but
do
it
it.
was just a sort of world-shattering uh, sort of shift from making the world feel like a much bigger place in a way. Imagining it all connected by this tiny tiny universes across the world of all of these sort of microorganisms. Um, and yeah, and just an appreciation that they are sort of everywhere,
Mm,
and they are sort of really fragile. They're yeah, I mean they're crucial to everything in terms of the environment and things like that. And actually, they are also quite fragile. So it's, I don't know, if we can appreciate things that aren't just the sort of classic charismatic animals, like you say,
mm.
and sort of care about everything around us. Yeah, I think that's always a good step in the right direction, isn't it?
Definitely, and also increases the possibility of, I mean, there's lots of debate in wildlife filmmaking, I suppose, about like environmental costs and whether it's valuable to go further afield to record things, and actually the knowledge that you can have things right on your doorstep, which
Yeah,
are kind of as amazing and dramatic as things,
definitely.
yeah, yeah, that's yeah, really cool. I would love to hear a bit more about your MA and wildlife filmmaking, because obviously this film was made as a part of that. How
Mhm.
did that course sort of influence your filmmaking, and what was your route onto that course?
Uh, so yeah, it was huge in terms of how it
Mm,
influenced my filmmaking. In terms of how I got onto the course, so I was actually had a sort of a job in tech actually before I even
mhm,
sort of thought about applying. I sort of hated my job. Well, it was okay, but I knew it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And then I basically wanted to sort of go and build a bit of a portfolio. So I went and essentially went traveling, but with the mind of filming stuff that I could
Mm.
then apply to the course. So I worked as a marine mammal I volunteered as a marine mammal medic in New Zealand, and volunteered at sort of biological station in Costa
Sounds
Rica.
amazing.
And just sort of tried to capture as much as I could. I
Mm.
really didn't know what I was doing, especially in hindsight. I probably felt like I did, but yeah, like sort of figuring out all of the basics. And eventually, after the second time I applied, I actually got into the course.
Mm.
Uh, and then when you get on the course, it's just, yeah, it sort of completely changed your perspective.
Mm.
You learn so much so quickly. You sort of do everything yourself. So you make 2 films on the course. You make a 5-minute film to sort of get you up to scratch, and then you do absolutely every sort of part of the production stage of your own
Mm.
film. So you do all of the research, you do the production paperwork, you do the risk assessments,
Wow.
you film it, you do all of the post-production paperwork. So you get like a complete understanding of
Yeah.
how to sort of make films. Um, and yeah, just really sort of thrown in the deep end. I
Mm.
think for me as well, in terms of thinking about my film as well, I think a lot of the sort of braver decisions were really sort of backed by the sort of teaching staff there. So
Mm.
Peter, who runs the course, really wanted me to sort of go uh, sort of fully into the. He sort of saw it as a silent film, and I should lean heavily into that.
Yeah.
Because I think there, like I said before, I think there was times where I thought about narrating it as well, but I
Yeah.
think actually it doesn't do the images justice,
No, yeah, it's
and also adding too much text or trying to explain what is actually happening in the images, even through text,
mm.
distracts you from it. And ultimately, I personally think the science is quite interesting, but I think it's quite dry in the way that
Yeah.
you talk about it, or you make it flowery, and it doesn't really do what's happening justice. So just let people sort of experience it, appreciate it, and then if they want to find out more, they can research themselves.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it gives the introduction to what the organisms are, and actually, yeah, it triggers that interest, which I think is so. What more can like a film about the natural world do? Um, I would love to hear if you have any kind of advice for young filmmakers who maybe want to look at natural world subjects and animal subjects. What can
Mm.
they do to kind of get going with that?
I mean, I think ultimately there's always some sort of cost in trying to film
Yeah.
sort of wildlife, isn't there? Because you have to sort of have the kit to film it. But most
Mm.
people have phones, and actually a lot of the content, especially in a sort of microbiology sort of context, people have filmed some amazing things just on their phones
Mm.
through a microscope. But then again, you do also have to sort of pay for a microscope. So there are
Yeah.
obviously barriers, but I think it is just sort of getting out there and doing it, and
Mm.
sort of learning uh, how to sort of build scenes basically, because you need that sort of variety of shot size, but ultimately you can make anything sort of interesting.
Mm.
Um, I think if you want to sort of go out there and do it, you should just go out there and do it basically. But
Yeah.
yeah, and also I think um, in terms I mean, it's a different thing in terms of getting into the industry as well.
Mm.
I think you should just applying for stuff and sort of learning the basics, applying for runner jobs. I think a lot
Mm.
of people don't necessarily always want to start as a runner, especially if they've done a course. Um, but I think it's probably the most valuable thing you can do, because nothing sort of teaches you more than sort of being on the job.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it is sort of persistence is also quite key. Yeah,
That's good advice. Thank you.
yeah.
And one more thing about congratulations as well on your nomination for
Thank you.
emerging talent at Wild Screen. That's so exciting. I've got a ticket for
Have
one
you?
of the screenings, so I'm excited for that. But I would just I wanted to ask you a bit about submitting into festivals, and obviously Wild Screen is like a natural world specific festival. Is it important to be aware of that sort of theme, as in when you're submitting your films, or do you think that there's more scope for like natural world films to be included in other festivals? I mean, what advice would you give on that sort of thing?
I mean, yeah, definitely. I think that you're always going to have maybe a better chance of applying for a festival that sort of aligns with the genre of your sort of film, doesn't it? But I think also, yeah, I think also just apply for anything. I mean, I basically had put my film forward for a few other documentaries over a year ago, and didn't get anything. And I sort of you sort of lose hope a little bit, and you
Yeah.
think everyone thinks it's not very good, but it does just sort of take the sort of the right panel and the right sort of minds to sort of see what you are getting trying to achieve. Really, I think is what it is. So I think it's just applying to as many things as you can,
Yeah.
and I guess afford to as well.
Mm.
Because yeah, some festivals aren't particularly cheap
Mm.
to apply to, but yeah, I think it's just not losing faith if you get rejected as well, because I think again it's just the persistence, and if you think it's good, someone else will think it's good as well.
Yeah, that's very true. And what are you working on at the moment? Have you got any more short films coming up? What are you kind of doing at the moment?
So I'm still doing microscopy,
Mm.
but I haven't got any sort of particular. I've got lots of ideas,
Yeah.
and haven't sort of followed any of them through just yet.
Okay, well, that's been so like great talking to you, Dan. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it, especially after your massive day and for seeing us. I really
That's
appreciate it. It's been so interesting. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone who has been watching this today. You can watch the film in our BFI Film Academy Instagram page bio, or you can find it on YouTube. If you want to keep up with Dan's work, his Instagram is at DanShawWild, so follow him on there. Also, please keep an eye out for our next scene series, which is our London Film Festival scene series. We'll be interviewing filmmakers whose work is part of the BFI Film Academy programme at London Film Festival. All the films are in the season hashtag Generation Now, and they all look at what it means to be a young adult in the world today. So hopefully that might be relevant to some people watching. I'm really excited to be kicking off this scene. I'm interviewing Amaya Owen Rowlands and Celia Lagarde about their brilliant film Fiercest Grace, and that is going to be out on the 10th of October at 4 p.m. So please check that out. Again, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.